Hey, Paula, I
working.
brought, just in case I was
Thank you.
needed to later. You know, if you came out.
It's working. No echo.
You what?
I just make sure.
You don't have to, do you have to tell? That's.
It's good.
I put my.
So I don't need
All good
to-
We are recording.
We're good, okay.
Uh-oh.
Believe that. Well, welcome and good afternoon. Today is Tuesday, February 21st, 2023. This is the Cottonwood Heights City Council work session. So our first item on our agenda is an interesting discussion. We have a guest here with us, and I'm sorry, I don't have your name.
Yeah, my name is Hector
Hector, what's your last name?
Soliman Valdez.
Okay, Soliman Valdez. Hector Soliman Valdez. Okay, great. So he is going to come and talk to us on behalf of Chief Russo, who invited him to come and talk about a new crime prevention technology, if I'm right, Chief. So we're excited to hear about it. So we'll turn the time over to you if you want to introduce it or.
Well, thanks. Hector flew in, he's the A-Rod for Fox Systems, and so he's their heavy hitter. And he's gonna do the presentation because he knows a lot about it. He brought Craig with him, who has come and he also flew in from Arizona. So we're gonna teach them both about snow in Utah,
Tonight.
from LA and Arizona. Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah, yeah.
You might not want to come back after
Yeah,
tonight. Yeah.
I'll let them get right into it because I know your time is precious, and then we reserved some time for questions. So you did get a memo in your packet, kind of briefly describing what the process is and how it works, but we can give you some real life examples of how it works. I first became familiar with them because right out here at the roundabout, we had an accident. One of the officers was pulling out, and he sees the accident. He goes up there, and the car that got rear-ended takes off, which is unusual. And he didn't get close enough. All he could see was there's a gray Mercedes with a Montana plate. And the car takes off, and we chase around for a minute, lose it. We don't want to chase that car. Midvale calls me up within minutes, and they said, hey, the car you're looking for, they're on the air saying, just went through here, and here's the actual plate number. They sent me pictures of it. And how did you do that? That's really cool. And they were explaining how they have these cameras all over the city, in Salt Lake City and down the 15 corridor and Nephi and all these places. And it captures these plates, and it's tied into NCIC, and they can find stolen cars or people who are, amber alerts or gray alerts, or even if we want to, here we have a neighborhood population. And if we have someone who's lost and we don't know where to find them, we can plug in their plate number and say, oh, look, they just went up Big Cottonwood. Or for people in Elm District, for instance. Now, let me tell you what this is not. This is not AI. This is not facial recognition. This doesn't do anything like that. This is not traffic enforcement. This is not where we try to catch people running red lights. It does not. This is not intended for that. We do not use it for that. No one in the state uses it for that. In fact, it's illegal, I believe, to still use that stuff for I like a traffic cop kind of thing. But there are instances you can use it. So tomorrow, if you wanted to know what was the traffic on Wasatch, and what was the traffic count, we could actually tell you that. And this system knows that. If Ellen's neighbors call her and say they were using Jake brakes at 2 in the morning, I called the cops, but of course, then they were gone. We can go through and find the commercial vehicles that went through there, find the plate number, call them and say, hey, can you? So it has a lot of uses. And I don't want to take your thunder. You know more about it than I do, but we put in the numbers, what it's going to cost, depending on how many cameras we want to buy, but just
Awesome.
the floor is yours.
Awesome. Again, my name is Hector. I am a community engagement manager with Block Safety. Craig is our territory sales manager. So he makes sure that all the departments are aware of us. I make sure to answer any questions that council and city staff has. Wanted to start off kind of just talking a little bit about Block Safety and who we are as a company. We were founded out of Georgia in 2017. Our CEO and a ton of his neighbors were repeated victims of crimes, right? So burglaries were happening in their neighborhood, car break-ins, etc. And just like many of you, they had Ring cameras, all kinds of video footage. And so they went to police, presented this information to them, and had this expectation that police would be able to follow up and find a license, or find the people that did it. But how many red Hondas are there in the city, et cetera, right? And so they let him know what we really need in these type of cases is a license plate. That's the first, good solid piece of evidence that will help us find the folks that are creating these crimes or performing these crimes in your community. So he set out to do some research and say, okay, well, what does it take for an HOA or neighborhood such as his to get these type of cameras, because he saw online there were tens of thousands of dollars, and it's technology that has been around for a while, right? I live in Los Angeles. Every mall that I go into, your license plate gets read, same as I'm assuming here, and many times that's how you pay. So found out this technology has been around for a while, but how do we make it, democratize it and make it available to neighborhoods? So built block safety at that point, using the same technology or level of technology that police departments need, but having a software as a service type model. What that means is that now cities don't have to purchase a $10,000 camera that goes obsolete, similar to what happens to your iPhone in a year or two, right? We will install a camera, permit it, install it, maintain it for $2,500 per camera, right? And that takes care of all your software, unlimited seats, i.e. everyone in the department that has the need to be on the system has the ability to be in the system. So that's where we got our start. And really, again, it's fun to hone in on the fact that this is a force multiplier, right? So this helps cities, neighborhoods be able to capture the right type of evidence provided to the right users, right? Law enforcement. And this allows for the whole community to work together. Now, how does the technology work? I know I did a little bit of talking about just how we were founded, but really want to point out this slide right here. On the top right-hand side, you'll see that you see actual footage from Flock Safety. It's the back of a vehicle. It is a license plate. And as you can tell, you also can't see into the vehicle. There's no people, there's no facial recognition with this technology. What the police can do, though, is search by filters such as make, model, color, etc. Right? Also important to talk about what the technology is not. So there's no personal identifiable information. There's no DMV records that Flock is providing to the police saying, hey, John Smith is in that vehicle. Again, this is an investigative lead. This is a vehicle that matches a description. It is a vehicle that is on a known wanted list. And then something else that's unique to Flock is our standard retention, which is 30 days. Now, what we've seen across the board is that this gives police departments enough time to investigate crime. Even if somebody's out of town for a couple of weeks, they don't notice right away. They then report it. Police can go in, investigate, but it's not long-term retention of data, right? It's automatically deleted. It's a hard delete, right? So it's not available to us or anyone at that point. Just want to just dive into the three different aspects of this technology. So it's proactive in that anytime a vehicle that's on a wanted list enters into Cottonwood Heights, your police department, within 20 seconds, an officer in their car or at the dispatch center will have an alert saying, hey, stolen vehicle, stolen plate is in the community, right? It's also investigative. So you report a crime, the police can then go in and see what vehicles were around, which vehicles match that description, and then follow any leads there. It's also a deterrent, right? So making sure that you bring this technology to this community, folks will know that the word will get out, and folks will know this is a community that's protected through this type of technology. Now, it's also important to talk about how Flock has mitigated risk, right? So, there are going to be privacy questions around this type of technology. So it's important to talk about the fact that Flock, unlike legacy providers, has never and will never sell the data associated with your cameras. So you as a city will own this data. Only you can share it. Your police department will be able to share with other law enforcement agencies within the system, right? For legal law enforcement purposes. This is also taking out the human bias aspect out of crime solving, right? So instead of depending on officers, saying this car looks suspicious, et cetera, we are alerting them proactively that this is a car that's on a wanted list, follow the chain of events and investigate accordingly. Also, the data is stored in AWS government cloud. That's the highest level of encryption available. It's the same servers used by agencies such as the FBI and CIA. I talked about the fact earlier that there's no personal identifiable information. It also leads to the fact that there's no traffic enforcement here, right? So there's not a button that can be pressed 6 months from now where now your police department is going to be issuing, red light tickets or registration tickets, et cetera. This is for law enforcement purposes. We also have the transparency portal.
Just so on the cameras themselves, there's nothing that detects speed, or is there?
There's no like speedometer on the cameras. So they are detecting every time a vehicle goes by, the machine learning is taking a picture of it and just cataloging it for the police.
There's not a radar that's saying it was going.
There's no radar, no. Something that's unique to, go ahead, man.
Question I would have is, can it capture, and share the information related to an accident? Like an accident in progress, well, how the cars came together. I mean, would it be filming that we could review and see?
It's still images, right? So it's the back of the vehicle, as you saw in the previous slide. So your police department will receive these type of images, right? So when they search for a vehicle, if somebody says it's a red Honda, they will be able to see and potentially see some damage. And I bring that up because in California, they just added an alert for hit and runs. It's a yellow alert. That is probably, California usually is a little bit ahead on these type of alerts. And so in the future, there are ways that this technology can be used to search for a vehicle that matches the description, but it's not live footage, right? So that's a different type of technology. But there are times where they'll be able to see, okay, this vehicle is the one that you were looking at. It was in the area. Let's follow
So
up.
it's really
Let's
just
find it.
capturing the back of the vehicle,
Yeah.
not the entirety of vehicles in several lanes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And so it just the chief can chime in here, a use case in that type of scenario. Let's say this is one that I actually heard of recently, a pedestrian hit and run. There were folks that said, hey, this is the vehicle in question. The police are able to put on a hot list based on that description and see any, hopefully no one drives a red Honda because I keep using that as an example. Is there a red Honda? Now they can see, have eyes on where the red Hondas are in town, follow up, hey, is there any damage, etc. Right, so that's one use case there. Because many times, folks flee.
So would, Hector, would Amber Alert be tied in for this as well?
Yeah, Amber Alerts are also, automatically tied into the system. Yeah.
So if you have an Amber Alert and they have a plate, it tries by one of these cameras. I took it in Cottonwood, but it allows us access to everybody else's cameras throughout the state. So it's a Nephi and it goes through. If we have one here and it hits a camera in Nephi, we will get that alert. That car just went through Nephi.
And how many cities presently in our area, in our valley, have this service?
I'm glad you're here, Craig.
Yeah, that's me. I'll take that. So Craig, I manage the area. I don't know the exact count, but there's quite a few from Salt Lake to South Salt Lake, Unified P, so the county. Provo just came on board. We have Springville and Nephi. We also have folks like Tooele and Centerville, and I think the majority of departments, if not all of them, but one, I believe, one or two in Weber County are all our customers. So like, for instance, Gabby Petito was confirmed up in Ogden using our technology a couple of years back. We just recently actually had a 14-year-old girl out of Wyoming that was taken by a 35-year-old man. We just recently had, because I cover Arizona and Utah. In Arizona, we just had, it was probably a month and a half ago. She was recovered using our cameras safely. So it was really a good thing. But there's this, my point is there's a wide network here of a lot of departments that use it. And so you're not just having one area, just Cottonwood Heights, you have some access to other police departments who are sharing by their choice and voluntarily, but they're all very friendly and are able to share information with each other. Actually, Centerville had they've had 6 good solves using just our MOU. So essentially just using the cameras that they didn't own, they had 6 crimes that they solved recently. The most recent one was organized retail theft at Kohl's. And that was before they had cameras of their own. Now they have cameras of their own, and things are starting to go even more quickly for them.
So when he says unified, obviously you're talking about Mill Creek, Holiday, Midvale, Kearns, Magna, the townships. Those.
So the connectivity, what I was getting at, the connectivity obviously adds greatly to the 30%.
Correct. Nationwide, we're in over 1,400 communities. Your department will have access to, if they're working on cases that are nationwide, at times being able to access the full network as well.
Thank you.
So this page here kind of highlights our transparency portals. This is unique to Flock. And so what this will allow your police department to do is have a web page. We'll put, give the link. Your police department can put this on the city website where folks can see what the policy is. what they're using the technology for, how many searches they're performing, how many hot list alerts they're receiving. So to have that real-time data on what this is for, but also just some insight, right? If folks perhaps maybe a couple months on the line, they see the cameras up, they want to just find out a little bit more about it. It's a great way for residents to do so.
Real quick question, 30 days is retained by the cloud.
Yeah,
And then if we have a case, chief, if we have a case, do we retain that?
Yeah.
Oh,
we
separately?
Pull it out, yeah.
Okay, so we could retain it because prosecution obviously is gonna take
takes a while.
way longer.
Yeah,
So they will be able to download it and use whatever evidence systems that
So it'd
they.
be admissible through.
yeah,
through
it's
this.
just all that other stuff, you know, you don't wanna. People will have a natural concern that, you know, someone's keeping my dad, I didn't do
right.
anything,
Yeah.
but if you're a suspect in a crime, that's when you.
So
take it
it's,
out.
Release your rights.
It's cloud-based storage. What's the reason for the 30-day number?
So we believe that it kind of is that sweet spot, right? It's not long-term retention of data, but it's enough for your police to go in and investigate a crime. At that point, though, you know, it's hard to delete it. So that's just our standard retention.
Have you vetted that against the state's retention schedule?
Yeah, so with our data, though, our legal department's taken, obviously, you all will come up with your own decision, is that the evidence that is actually in custody of the department is a part of ongoing investigations, right? So the way that the system works is your department downloads that data, they put it in their evidence system, it now goes through that, you know, chain of or custody. It's those policies apply. Anything else the department has not been in receipt of, and so we're holding it for you and deleting it as it goes. So it was never part of an investigation, never actually received by the department.
I was gonna say that there causes a little consternation. In looking back a couple of years ago, the state of Utah had an enormous issue with some technology very similar to this.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're aware of that case and everything that's behind it. How are you able to provide that level of confidence that the citizenry or the state will not have those same concerns?
Yeah, so it was a little in that scenario, it was a little different because it was private cameras. So this is part of the police department's equipment. So it's treated different. It wasn't the same concern at that time, right? It was really about people putting up the same type of technology and there being no oversight on the private side.
Yeah, I'm gonna add to that a little bit. So I'm very, very familiar with the law from 2012 that came out and kind of how that was pointed. And obviously, just what I do in my career, I'm an expert at that LPR sort of technology, license plate reading technology. Some of the challenges, and having lived in Utah for quite a while myself, I have an 801 cell phone number, you know, I understand the challenges. And part of the way that law was written is it's really pointed at a couple of things. First of all, we don't want private companies collecting mass data on people and selling it to police departments and insurance companies and collection agencies and tracking people and retaining that data, right? So as Flock, before we really ever even got involved in Utah, our stance has always been, we want to have a relatively limited amount of time with no personally identifiable information. And if we're able to sort of stay away from being a data conglomerate, what it allows us to do is give the police the tools they need to solve crime in real time without collecting data on the community and protecting people's privacy in that way, but still having access to immediate needs that the community has when something truly dangerous is happening.
And to that point, because the data is owned by the city, right? So we're not selling it or sharing it with anyone. So that kind of relates to my question.
Yeah, I got Kobe and grandma though, because it's not really a question of whether. As a question, previously, belongs to the city, but it's records. And the city has an obligation to retain its records for certain periods of time. 30 days. Excuse me, 30 days is going to be long. So, pretty far to that issue.
Yeah,
It's not an issue of whether somebody gets signed or whatever, it's, if this guy is, then that was a city record, and the city must have obtained it for a particular period of time.
yeah, and
Shane, what do we do with the video cameras that we've got now at the
Let's
intersections?
discuss Paul.
Okay.
There's a state retention schedule, but we follow.
what we can do in that case is when, when that is being discussed, the retention policy, our legal team can work with you all. They can provide you kind of, hey, this is what the opinion has been. In other places, they can go over, just where they are with that. They're probably more versed on that. And I'm assuming you're,
Yeah, I'm happy.
I was gonna say, these are counsel.
yeah, I'm assuming, I am not an attorney, and even if I was, I couldn't give you legal advice. But we'll definitely connect you all together at that point. But it's definitely a question that comes up, to be honest. But our legal team has seen that the explanation that I provided really work across the board in states like Washington State, where they have an even more rigorous public records request act. So
Mayor, the retention schedule for body cameras, video says that retain until resolution of issue and then destroy records.
What about if it's not an issue?
If it's not an issue, then it's resolved, right?
So I think from other agencies in the area, kind of the key here is that you're not actively accessing the information. It's anonymized until there's a crime. The only way for the police department to access the information is to have a case number or a reason to search the information, or it's already on a hot list in terms of the NCIC. So Flock's acting as a custodian of the data. We don't own the data, but the data we hold, and it automatically purges itself as time goes on, unless the police department as a user pulls that information in. So from a legal standpoint, that's how that's accomplished, because the police department isn't acting and doesn't really have that information unless there's an ongoing investigation.
So we would pull the data from your system and we could have it in our records for years or whatever.
yeah, in order-
During
That's
the
exactly how all the other departments in the area are handling things like grandma.
Does that satisfy your thoughts, Shane Topham, on the state code or?
We'll have to look at that.
I would say, if there are other cities that have been doing it, then it's a matter, I mean, you certainly could check with their legal and find out
yeah, we
how
can,
they're addressing it and make sure that passes.
and our legal team can also help and just connect you, obviously, with the folks that they've talked to.
Yeah, it might be as simple as we don't own the data until we pull it, right?
That's typically what we've seen.
But it's generally event driven, right?
Yeah, so the policy will say, hey, there's a case number, or an incident. That's when they're looking for something. They're then pulling the data at that point. So just wanted to quickly highlight some of the stories in your area. This is from Centerville. They've had different, burglaries, $10,000 in tools in a vehicle burglary. This is just a kind of a quick list of what they've had: in and out, hit and run, violent aggravated assault, stolen vehicles, fraud and theft. And then they actually were able to identify a organized retail theft ring out of Kohl's. So really just also want to highlight that obviously this is a no-brainer. This is stolen vehicles is going to be, really help with that. There's so many other different types of crimes where we're helping. This one out of San Bruno, California, actually made national headlines because they went into this jewelry store to attempt to rob it. They had armed security, so he was able to, dissuade them from going any further. But what the police department believed would happen, that they would return and be ready, escalate their level of violence. So they put a hot list on that vehicle. So as soon as it entered into that shopping center again, they were able to stop it, really. So really preventing the crime from escalating in its level of violence. And then wanted to end with this story out of Chamblee, Georgia. As I mentioned earlier, Chamblee is in the Metro Atlanta area. That's where we were founded. We have a very, very robust network there. This mother was pushing her child into his stroller when two masked and armed individuals came up to her, fought her, took her child away from her. She had no idea who these people were. She actually didn't even get a plate, but she did see the vehicle, right? Really easy to tell the description, gave that to police. They immediately went and investigated, put out an alert on that vehicle once they had a plate. They actually found the vehicle and made a stop and arrest in Alabama, one state over. All of this was before 6 p.m., within 6 hours, right? This is an extremely rare case. This doesn't happen all the time, but this is where this technology is really, really helpful. Turns out the folks that took the child, they wanted to raise the child on their own, had attempted this several times, and no one had come forward until that day. And so luckily, they were able to solve the crime that quickly. So I know I did a lot of talking. I know we've asked some questions, or you guys have asked some questions, but happy to dive in a little bit deeper as well.
I'm curious, I'm looking at the information that was supplied to us, and I'm looking at a map of Cottonwood Heights, and are the red bubbles, are those where, and this is, I guess, a question for Chief Russo, is that where you would intend to put these cameras, where there are the red call outs, I guess you call it?
Yeah, we started with the number 10, and Sergeant Morzaleski, who's in charge of investigations, not together with Craig. I kind of eyeballed some areas I thought would be, strategic to place those cameras. As you can see, there's a couple up on Wasatch down in by Whole Foods and Target and Trader Joe's, and Highland Drive by the freeway. So hopefully, they're in areas where if there was a crime in the neighborhood, we would be able to capture somebody trying to leave the city or coming into the city, or in areas where we have, problems now anyway. So those aren't hard areas that we've decided on. Those are just kind of, this is one drift scenarios. So
Use the term software as a service, so what's bottom line? 10 cameras is what kind of a budget impact?
What about her piece, right?
It's 2,500 per year per camera. There's an installation fee the first year of about $350 per camera. So that includes the permitting, installation, maintenance, right? If anything happens, goes wrong with the camera, we will come out and replace it within 48 hours. And then the software, right? So there's upgrades that happen, and that's all automatically done. You'll have a customer success manager that will help train the department, and be the point of contact as well.
That consistent, whether it's one camera or 100?
It actually is. You get full access to the system that way.
Hector, I've got a question. Are these cameras single view, or do they have cameras that are set up with multi vision?
So they capture 2 lanes of traffic, but the images you're getting are focused on one.
So just single shot. But
Yeah.
they do have a different aperture width,
Yeah.
width type
Yeah.
thing, right?
Exactly.
We have
So
a 3-lane road, you have to have 2 cameras?
you'd have to in one direction, right? So at that point you'd have to get 2 cameras. Yeah.
But the way that we're doing it on the map is we're pulling back to where there's 2 lanes, creating choke points strategically, so we can get away with, like some of your intersections open up into, 6 lanes suddenly, right, going one direction. So if we're able to pull it back a little bit, we can capture 100% of the traffic going through a specific area that way.
Well, good, no, I gathered you weren't restricted to just. I guess my only initial thought when I saw this was it would be nice to maybe, I understand these are places where all the action happens, and there's certainly good reasons for that, but it seems like we may want to put 1 or 2 out in some of the areas of the city. Just didn't think about that completely, but it just seemed like maybe get someone. Doug doesn't get to have everything.
Well, I guess in that stead, I would also have to go on record as saying that when we look at our regular CHPD heat map showing where our officers are spending their greatest amount of time, they're spending their greatest amount of time in this area that right now 2, 4, 6, 7 of the cameras are at least at this point kind of intended for. And I think that's a little disproportionate. I also don't support spending so much of our CHPD resources helping the big box stores with their petty crime. I know my constituents want to see our officers issuing speeding tickets, looking for noise violations. That's what I'm constantly getting from them. We need help over here, especially on all these snowy mornings and this and that. And so to answer to my constituents, I feel that I'm going to be hard pressed to support something that is going to, press $30,000 annually toward more crime management over in an area which already, is getting the majority of our CHPD officers' time and our resources in essence.
Well, the beauty of the system is that with the cameras, we don't have to be there. We can be doing other things. The camera acts, as a supplement for us when we're not there, that we can go back and, capture what we missed and then start investigation.
It would be
from that.
interesting
It can't be everywhere.
yeah, it'd be interesting to see if you have any kind of sketch on that kind of data that would show that it is a savings in terms of officer time to utilize these cameras. That would be helpful for me as I decide whether I can support this new expenditure for the city.
I've got a question as well. Chief, have we ever put a dollar amount of what crime costs in our city? We get a lot of on social media, oh, our packages are stolen off our porch. There's thieves, taking things and that. Have we ever equated that figure to see what we are losing from crime? And not catching the criminals, obviously. Because there's a small proportion of people doing all the crimes or a lot of the crimes.
Yeah, we would agree. And when the officers take a report, they enter in a dollar amount or expected dollar amount of the loss of the value of it. That's from property crimes. We can't put a number on the person's crimes, how do we measure that? A number, you can't assess a number for it. So yes, I can answer the property crimes and do the research for that, but this is also intended to help with the property or the person's crimes that we can.
If I was a criminal, no, I won't kid Scott about it, but I would be less likely to go into that city that had this. I'm not trying to sell this. We're just retaining everything we can. But I had an instance where someone broke a window, stole a checkbook that I didn't even know I had. They were able to go to 7 different cities and cash those checks, but they knew the stores that didn't have cameras in there. And that was so frustrating because I had to deal with 7 different cities for 4 months. And they finally were caught because some of the detectives just really wanted to catch these guys because like I say, a small number of people cause a lot of trouble.
That's exactly right. So what we've seen is, when let's say you have 10 burglaries in a month in a city.
I wish.
Hopefully, lower one. But it's not 10 different individuals most of the times with that, that specific crime. And so if you're able to capture them on that first or second, then you're able to prevent some crimes. And then to the kind of the other part of the conversation, which is how do you measure return on investment? I can definitely say what I see most customers do is that there's 2 aspects. There's the property crime. So what amounts of stolen goods are recovered, et cetera. That's usually something that police departments will measure. And then there's that other part, which is immeasurable, which is like Amber Alerts, Silver Alerts, et cetera. And so that's kind of what council will then just suppose once they see, at the year mark, et cetera, what the results are.
There's actually a local example that I think could speak to both of your questions. Springville's a customer. They use our cameras. They have their cameras just on the main entrance there into Springville. Actually, one of them is one of them, because IHOP was very gracious, allowing us to put a camera up on the IHOP poles. Next time you're in Springville, check it out. There's actually one camera down here by Walmart already. I drove past it earlier. But they actually had, and you can look this up on the news, it's a recent package that thief from Springville, they have pictures of him. They were able to use our LPRs to identify him. So he was doing, he was being a porch pirate in their neighborhoods, but would hit main areas of the city. And so what we're doing is we're trying to find an area where we get a lot of that traffic that might go commit that crime and still able to stop that while being an amplifier for the police department. So that was that was at both a recent and nearby story where it kind of addressed both of those concerns, and that way is what we found with other departments.
Well, hey, thank you, Hector and Craig, for coming and Chief Russo, and this will be an item that we'll continue to discuss. So thank you. Appreciate you
Great.
coming.
Great, thanks to meet all of you. Thanks so much
Thank
for your
you.
time.
Yeah.
Look forward to speaking in front of you all again on a non-snowy day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I will do that.
So item
I'll do
three,
it. Thanks.
we have another guest with us here today from Voda Planning. And that's Mark Morris, right? So come on up, Mark, we'll get you started. He along with our Community and Economic Development Director, Mike Johnson, are going to lead a presentation on form-based code.
We need a real quick intro. We
Yeah.
talked about form-based code. Mark was here a few months back, just as a kind of form-based code 101. We've been having weekly meetings, making some progress on this in the meantime. Just a reminder, the funding to develop this was awarded along with the funding we got for the general plan. So they're kind of being developed together. So Mark's just here to give an update on kind of status update on where we've been in the last couple months. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Mark.
Okay, sounds great. Great to be with you again. Hopefully, you recall our conversation from a couple months ago. Who's got control of this?
I've got it here, so just let me know.
So like Mike mentioned, we are working with staff on developing the form-based code. The update today, if you think about it, we're really trying to learn a new language. We're not going to try to teach you everything you need to know tonight, but really just to kind of show here's the structure of what a form-based code is and does. We'll keep coming back to you as we continue to develop. So if you remember from a couple months ago, we talked about why cities pursue form-based code, what benefit there is to that. One thing I'll point out is that form-based code is expandable. And so as you'll see from what we'll talk about today, we've really focused the code on being implemented in 3 specific nodes in the city. And really the goals and objectives that have been developed during the general plan process, the intent is that the form-based code is going to implement some of those goals or better support those goals in the city's development code. So, fine. As far as this project goes, we've worked with staff to develop 3 main goals for what we're trying to accomplish. First is to update city code to better align with the city's vision for development along Fort Union Boulevard. So the 3 nodes that we're going to talk about and that we're developing code for are along Fort Union. Second is to support implementation of existing city master plans along the corridor. So you have a master plan for the Fort Union Boulevard corridor. The intent is to better align the code to support what that planning work was intended to create.
When you say better align, well, I guess what does that mean? Or how is it deficient now? I guess maybe that's a different way to.
Sure, I think that's a great question. From discussions with staff, it seems that there has been pushback against some of the development along Fort Union that doesn't quite meet the city's intent or goals, or perhaps doesn't turn out in the way that the city had hoped. So that's really what the kind of how do we resolve key issues that you're seeing, okay, this development isn't quite where we want it to be. How do we better define that in the code so that the product that you're actually getting is more what you have.
Yeah, I think-
The master plan is not codified enough.
I think number 3 really gets at what this really helps with is most of the future land use from Union Park down to 2300 East is mixed use. But mixed use could look very different at a Union Park Center, where there's higher density than it looks in, along Fort Union Boulevard, the corridor between Highland Drive and Union Park. So it's a context sensitive approach that gives us more detail and more clarity in what redevelopment looks like depending on where we are and what's around us.
So your city planning documents, those can be adopted
unless the code itself is updated, you're still gonna get, okay, what does the code say? Because really what you're getting is what the code says needs to happen. So what we've been doing with staff is trying to identify what are the things that aren't quite giving you what you want, and how do we make the code support that. The general plan draft that has been in process for the last little while, we've pulled those goals from that draft general plan just to make sure that it's spelled out very clearly where the code is hoping to support that. So when we say things like we want a walkable development, that's all well and good, unless the code actually spells out what does that mean, you'll continue to get kind of what you have. So in this draft, we've included all of the goals, relating to parks and recreation, sustainability, transportation. All of those pieces really help to support, we'll kind of think of the form-based code as the next step after the general plan is updated. Great. So structurally, this is kind of how a form-based code is typically structured. What you do first is establish a place type. And so in this particular effort, we're focused on 3 nodes along a very specific route through the city. That isn't to say that in the future, in our last discussion, we talked a little bit about neighborhood nodes on Bengal Boulevard. The gravel pit area is another opportunity for the city. This code, again, you can always come back to this number 1 and look at place types and decide, okay, if we're expanding the code, the context of that place is going to determine what the code looks like. So these place types are meant to be pretty universal across urban centers across the country.
If I may ask a question, so you have the 3 areas, Union Park, 2300 East, and Town Center. So going from west, in essence, eastward on Fort Union Boulevard. And so I don't see necessarily the same place type describing certainly Union Park versus 2300 East or Town Center. And so are you saying that for this whole stretch, you choose one, or that we would, for each of these 3 different areas, we could choose from Boulevard Community to Main Street? Am I understanding that train of thought properly?
Yes, I think that's a great question. I think for clarity and simplicity, we looked at this Boulevard Community type and said, okay, each of these nodes will be at a different scale, but for all intents and purposes, they're defined by Fort Union Boulevard. So I think the differentiation really shows up in number 2, which is districts. And so the place type, these places all have something in common, which is the boulevard itself. But then when we get into that next level of definition, those district types will help us to define, okay, Union Park Center is obviously going to be different than the Town Center. How is that defined?
So for instance, on that second level in orange, where you have, 5.9 street types, and it says alley, lane, neighborhood, connector, avenue, boulevard. So if we'd like to see back alleys for perhaps both the residential and the commercial that fall within the 2300 East and Town Center, we could say, well, yeah, in those 2 areas we want alley, and I don't know the distinctions between these different terms. I'm assuming alley is one of the smallest, and then a lane in the neighborhood and so forth until you get to a boulevard. But so we could pick and choose within, for instance, in number 2, which in each of the color types we want within each of these 3 areas. Is that right? And
yes, I think your train of thought is great. The structure of the form-based code is meant to be pretty widely applicable. And so a good portion of these are really meant for places like, for example, last time we talked about Farmington. The form-based code work that I've been involved in Farmington is greenfield development. There's nothing there. And so defining this many types of streets was really fundamental to that code. for your code, you're really looking at redevelopment for these places. So if we were talking about the gravel pit area as well, we might want to define more street types. But the street types that we've kind of pinpointed as should be in the code are really those types that you're mentioning. So those alleys, lanes, the small types of connections that will help the street grid operate. We're not fundamentally changing the city's street grid with any of this development. What we're trying to do is make the internal circulation better. And so we're not saying we're going to change how, how the streets are configured. Mostly it's going to be internal to a development. What types of lanes and access do we need to make sure?
Well, there's kind of a fundamental thing here, and maybe this is more a question for Mike Johnson. I know in the 2017 Fort Union Boulevard Master Plan, there was a desire to have a portion, and maybe that portion, I don't know the exact easterly coordinates for that to make 2300 East distinct from town center. I guess anything perhaps west of 2300 East to the Union Park. I guess the point I'm trying to get at is that my understanding of that in reading the master plan was that they did want to see some transformation of Fort Union Boulevard, where we're really trying to create a Main Street feeling. That would actually reduce the number of vehicular lanes in order to.
And that discussion and those types of things we're having with staff right now. In the code that we've kind of drafted, we won't get into street types tonight. We've really just included boulevard type, which is, okay, what does that master plan say Fort Union should become as far as redesign goes? But then there isn't a lot of change in between kind of boulevard scale and interior development scale. So all of that work in that Fort Union master plan, kind of what does that road profile for Fort Union look like? That's in the code itself, so that as development happens, we know exactly what the expectation is from what the city plans to do, what private development would be.
Well, doesn't it? And maybe this is.
I'm trying to get, I'd like to get out of the weeds because I'm still trying to get how it actually works as opposed to what are we going to do with it? Because I think, sorry. So does this work as like an overlay zone with subsections? Is that a paradigm that how it goes? How do we determine where it gets applied and to what degree?
Yeah.
That's kind of.
That's all up to the council, and as the code is developed, you will weigh in and decide how this implements. Is it a brand new zoning? Is it an overlay that you apply? How aggressively do you want to apply it? The PDD is an option right now. You don't have to follow or go down the PDD process. You can just use standard zoning. Typically with form-based code, you would make form-based code the only option, so you know what you're getting along a redevelopment corridor. But how you implement that ultimately is up to the council.
Well, that's what I was saying. Within the PDD structure, you could certainly do all of these same kinds of things, but that would also be on a case-by-case basis.
Correct.
This is kind of pre-planning some of the development as opposed to waiting for blank sheet proposals to come in.
And I think that's a really good way to couch it, to say, really, we're trying to make decisions in advance to say, okay, what types of development, what intensity of development, how does the circulation work? So that when development comes along, we can say, hey, we've already got this code that really is going to tell us what are the things that the city's going to require.
In my mind, isn't it more we're determining how we want it to look and not determining what goes where?
Yeah, I think the name form-based code is meant to focus on, okay, what is the form of the development itself? How does it look? Right now, really, most cities, the iron grip is on use because that's one of the few things that you have a lot of control
It takes a lot of look.
Yes.
I mean, a 7-Eleven may be the exact same size as a medical office, but they certainly look different and they
Right.
and they have different traffic patterns, and so that.
Right. Yeah, so really the intent is to shift the focus a little bit away from use only and more to, okay, what is the form of this development? as I mentioned in our last discussion, these aren't architectural standards. So we're not talking like, okay, we're gonna define what is the color that all buildings in Cottonwood Heights are gonna be, what is the stone that is.
So this isn't as strict as Park Cities.
It is nowhere near as strict as Park Cities. They're notorious for being focused, laser focused on,
Look and feel.
yeah, and they have a reason to do that.
And I mean, that's fine and STEM, but no, I don't think it's.
Yeah, and I think it's to say, okay, in this area, we're trying to develop a town center. How does the built environment contribute or make it feel less like a town center? So that form is really where the focus is. It's not on architectural specifics. So, Mike, let's go to the next, the Boulevard community. For a lot of reasons, we really said, let's define one place type. All of these nodes are really defined by Fort Union Boulevard. For simplicity, this is the city's first foray into form-based code. Additional place types can be brought into the code in the future. As I mentioned, the code is all about context. So what is the neighborhood context? The code that would apply to these nodes on Fort Union Boulevard would be very different from what would apply on Bengal, where you have a far more residential, smaller scale type of development. What happens in the gravel pit, like that context is really baked into the code.
So was what you had said to me before we moved to this slide about, so form isn't as much architecture, which that's kind of what I had thought.
Mhm.
So what is it then that you're talking about when you
Sure.
say form? Because we're getting away from use.
Sure.
And so help me understand that better.
What's the middle ground?
Yeah,
Yeah, so I'd say we're talking, so capital A architecture, you've got a lot of factors, you've got how the building is organized. This building, for example, you've got building materials. There are lots of things that go into that. The form-based code would really say, okay, here are the types of buildings that would be appropriate in this area.
for example,
Just so you've got a lot of different building types. If it's like, you think about the Union Park area, that building type, kind of taller height, those types of things would be defined. Distance from the street is a form choice. So when we talk about like 7-Eleven, how that building is situated on the site, form-based code is going to define that. And so if you build a 7-Eleven and it's up against the street and its primary entrance is right on the street, that starts.
7-Eleven's not gonna wanna buy it.
Well, that's
I mean, in reality, that's just not what they do.
right. And that's I guess that's the question for the city is, okay, how do we define, or what are the things that are non-negotiable? Ages ago, we had in Farmington, a long battle with McDonald's over how could the form-based code be met, but still they got their kind of standard patterns, right? And so that's kind of the question of how is that implemented in a way that the people who aren't willing to meet that code, where does that negotiation end
If
up?
we go too far, who tells us we screwed up? I mean,
yeah,
that's,
In terms of form though, Mayor, it's more, how tall is the building? What's the density? You can get
Square
into, is
footage.
it a flat roof or a pitched roof? Floor area ratios, where is parking situated? Does it have to be structured? Is it surface parking? Where does the front door have to be to orient? It creates a form that matches kind of the character of the vision you have in mind. Less so, hey, what color siding do we need to apply on the north side of every building? It doesn't get into that level of detail. But it does more than the current mixed use ordinance, which just says, hey, you have setbacks and you have height limits and you have some use restrictions and you design within that. So it's kind of a middle ground between, we want it to look exactly like this and this color and everything and what we have now.
I have a quick question. Let's put a face on this. I think of, okay, say the Smiths, that's, where that is. That's an existing property. It may be, when you get aged, you try to replace, you try to resurface, reface. What would the owners of that property, would we limit them to what they could do through form base and say, you can't do this and you could only have this either type of tenants, or is that what you're saying?
in the general plan, not as current owners. Right?
Well, but you can't grandfather, you know what I mean? That would be a grandfathered situation?
So the conversation around nonconformity is one that we'll have, not tonight, but nonconformity is a big discussion. The intent is never to say, okay, every property owner now needs to get with it and change what they're doing to meet the form-based code. That is not.
No, I'm talking about if someday when that will change,
Sure.
and then that will have limitations placed upon it to where somebody says, well, now the land's only worth X amount of dollars because of what we can do with that property.
Sure. The intent is that in the form-based code, you establish triggers that say, okay, if you expand the footprint of your building by 50%, or there are certain thresholds that you should be aware of that you would then need to meet that form-based code.
Yeah, this is not just like the discussion we've been having with the other. But yeah, once you get to that point of redevelopment, and that's where I was talking about. This has been some of the feedback nationally on where this has become a problem because those goalposts sometimes get changed as you get new councils and they want to do something different. So there is a risk. You could certainly restrict things down to where someone could perceive that their land is not as worth as much as they wanted. That's a cautionary tale. I don't know that it necessarily throws the baby out with the bathwater, but
The idea though is,
you should be aware that it's possible. What if we go too far and it makes it undevelopable?
the idea is it matches the non-conforming code we have today, which says
Yeah.
you modify, maintain, relocate, you can do all that even if you don't meet current code. If you full on redevelop, then you gotta follow the rules we have in place.
So we already have guardrails in place, and I guess, do we change that guardrail? Is that what you're saying?
We'd have
if we
similar
have-
guardrails with more specificity.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We're prettying them up. I'm putting a couple humps in them.
So let's see, quick question. So I'm just looking for clarity as well. So this would be where the codes would actually impact access, issues like access, easements, things like that as changes take place. Okay, great.
Yeah, I think when we talk about, okay, the intersection of 23rd East and Fort Union, we have this idea, okay, we want some kind of town center for Cottonwood Heights. What's out there today, not necessarily no one would go there and say, oh, this is a walkable town center. But we're really focused on, okay, as these properties turn over, as someone comes in and redevelops, what sort of things really need to happen? Defining paint color, defining stone selection, that's really not fundamental to what's going on in the town center. What we really need to do is figure out how do we focus on the form of what's going on there, bringing things to the street, making it feel like it really is the center of the city. So currently the code isn't going to do that for you. Defining that code, making those decisions in advance so that when properties turn over or redevelopment happens, we have a clear picture of what that's going to look like.
But we're talking about the bones now, not the skin, basically.
Right. I mean, from a development standpoint, I mean, paint color can be changed in an afternoon. Where a building is situated is very expensive to change. And so what I would say, if we focus on the things that are really difficult to change and not worry so much, a new building owner comes along and puts a stone veneer on a building, that's great. But that's not going to change if the building is 300 feet from the street. That's never going to be a walkable place. So focusing on those things that are harder to
If you were in a district or an area where you wanted some connectivity. For example, the 2030s, there was one, where it actually crossed the streets. And so you had the intersection, but you also had kind of a way to get around this way if you connected a couple of other things in the longer term.
Yeah.
I guess that you'd put in your code because that deals with the setbacks or flow.
Yeah.
Where you may, you could get that if on a site by site or parcel by parcel redevelopment, but you have to make sure that you've got that vision really hardcore for a long period of time because they don't all get
Sure.
Nancy's come in and says, what's the plan for the plan? Well, the plan is Fort Union always has been, as things get redeveloped, we want it to become like this. It was never let's go find $50 million and make it happen.
But then you've got geography too. I mean, you look at 23rd, Fort Union, you've got two of the biggest hills in our city right there. I mean, that's a brisk walk, and I've done it before. But that's walkability is really an issue, you know, in certain areas in our city.
So in your mind, Mike, are we approaching this as with the specific goal of where we would implement form-based code along Fort Union Boulevard? in our
Yeah.
General plan?
Yeah, no, so the general plan, we're developing this based on some of the goals in the general plan that's being drafted. This essentially becomes an implementation step of the general plan and adds predictability. As we know, Fort Union will redevelop over time. This adds more predictability into how that will happen
This
to meet the
part of the
vision.
zoning ordinance.
Typically, yes. And whether it's the only option or an overlay, that'll be up to the council to decide, but yes, this would be codifying what's in the general plan and the master plan, which right now are the master
We
plan
have
level.
typically followed the general plan or made an alteration when something different has come up. This would be a little more toothy.
Yeah.
So if I may add, so for example, and I've been involved in one of these, the general plan and the community I was involved in had defined the area, the district, that this was going to be a unique district. And then the follow-up to that was defined in the general plan is drafting of an ordinance that came in with these form-based code components, defining where you want the buildings, how you want them situated, where you want the parking, even the specifics of the buildings, how often do you want entrances into the buildings, window settings. I mean, that's getting into the detail, but the bottom line is that form was defined in the zoning ordinance after the general plan was adopted. And that zoning ordinance had the specifics that we're talking about here. I mean, getting even more into the specifics on how you deal with that. And that's the form of how that's shaped.
Maybe a good example to think about is Canyon Center and the townhomes at 1700 East and Fort Union were developed in the same exact zone. Same rules apply to both of those developments, but they look very, very different from each other. This would take us down to, hey, if you're in this area of the city, development ought to look this way, but as you go farther east or west, it changes depending on where you are. It adds a little more predictability up front. So you know that regardless of along this major corridor in the city, wherever development happens, it will have been essentially calibrated to fit wherever that is.
So we could be creating different form-based codes as we went east along Fort Union possibly.
Essentially, yeah.
Or at least different nodes or pieces inside of it.
Right.
One of the things I really like about this direction is this idea of context, as Mike Johnson has pointed out. And we know that our residents say their view sheds are very important to them and this and this and this. And so I think this will give us a chance to say, you know, in where you abut these residential, properties, then there has to be a tiering to get to these higher heights instead of, within 20 feet, you can go up to 35-foot height. I mean, I think it really gives us a chance, to customize this to meet the needs of the existing residents, again, whose properties abut the corridor, and then also create this sense of vibrancy that people want to walk and look in. And I mean, it's interesting that Park City was brought up. I don't know about anybody else. I love to walk along Main Street in Park City. It's fun. And not every shop is a boutique. There's some that are a little larger and more commercial, but I think Park City is an example of a robust Main Street that people flock to. They're willing to leave their cars in a stacked parking lot a little bit away, and then they enter through design corridors, easements between the buildings, and then Main Street unfolds, as they come, out, and it's a real experience. And I think Cottonwood Heights, I mean, we have the most magnificent views. We way have better views than Park City. Are you kidding? So I'm just saying we have such an opportunity to really feature our marvelous views and make Cottonwood Heights a place that, frankly, people of hopefully all economic levels can come to, but also people with some money to spend, and that will help our local businesses.
Yeah, no, I think that's all great. I think the context is really the key here, that, like Mike says, current zoning code can be interpreted in many, many ways to good or for good or for ill. Intent of the form-based code is to say, okay, use is less important. It's really about what is the feel? How does this development start to define what Cottonwood Heights is? I think there are a lot of cities in the valley that, 10 years ago had no discernible center. You look at what Holiday has done, you look at what Mill Creek is doing, really making sure that your code is going to define the type of development that you'd like to see in a way that gives you, again, the non-negotiables are in there, and then gives some leeway as far as what, if someone's developing, they have a lot of choice to work with. Mike, let's go to the maps. The neighborhood section here that we've been working on, again, this is meant to be the next step from what the general plan process has been looking at. The next,
Oh, sorry.
I could read
There you go.
a little bit. I
Yeah.
really.
yeah,
I just.
so that's Fort Union.
That's Highland Drive.
And that's
This is current zoning today.
So one reason why we've got this map, what we've done is really used parcel boundaries and edges to kind of define how do we establish which parts of the city are really going to be under this form-based code. So on the next slide, Mike, the Union Park District is kind of the furthest west node that we're talking about. This map on the bottom is, okay, here's your existing zoning map, how that's defined. Mike, on the next slide, we've got Highland Drive, so a little bit further east, establishing that with a different type of district. And then the third, this 2300 East District, which is kind of established as this would be town center. This would be a spot that someone traveling through would want to stop.
Is this Montview Park or what?
No, that's Bella Vista.
Well, that's Bella Vista.
Mhm.
Okay.
And Mike, the maps on the district, the district types, as I mentioned, okay, we've got an overall place type. This place is a boulevard community, a community defined in this part of the city by Fort Union Boulevard. The next level of form establishment is really looking at districts and saying, how are these three places different? So the district type is probably the closest that you're going to get to what you would think of as traditional zoning, where we're kind of looking at, okay, how are these three places different? What types of districts or differentiation can we build into those when we start talking about density, building height, all of those parts. So let's go to the maps. Mike, go forward one more. There we go. So this is a farm district map looking at, okay, we've got different types within these nodes that start to establish that level of differentiation or concentration. So the abbreviations after each one of these, each of these form district types, that is kind of the closest correlation that you might find to a zoning code. So the Union Park Center itself would have its own definition. So this type would be unlike any other part of the city, with the level of intensity or the level of development that's already happening there. As that part of the city redevelops, or as someone comes along and changes what's going on, that would be defined in its own special way. The second, that Fort Union Boulevard, is really any of those parcels that kind of butt up against those major corridors through the area. What does that form look like? The last residential transition, that RT district at the bottom, that's really looking at, okay, these parts where we're trying to buffer the surrounding neighborhoods, those parcels would be defined a little bit differently from,
Would this be the new apartments that are gonna be built? This,
That is
Find it.
that's up there.
right there.
Yeah, I guess why would you that single family.
Alright.
Piece, why would that not be part of the transition?
Well, we wouldn't be proposing any changes to the code that addresses those parcels.
To be added, we left single family zoning out.
Just,
Yeah.
I think the amount of change that you're going to see, you're always going to see more change in commercial, commercial zone.
we, that single family find that's.
Yeah, and that generally is if the surrounding neighborhoods know that nothing is changing for them, that's a lot easier to.
But there are some single family lots in the city that probably, on Fort Union specifically, there are some people who still live there.
Sure. The Highland Drive intersection, you can see the two district types that would be found there. The boulevard type and that residential transition, which again, we're talking kind of stepping down in concentration of use. And then the last one here, that town center, again, using a district type to really define, okay, what's happening in the town center is going to be different from everywhere else in the city. How do we codify that? How do we define that in a way that it really accomplishes what you'd like to see for the town center? So that intersection, all of the parcels abutting that intersection would be that district type would apply. And then those other two, Fort Union Boulevard type and that residential transition type. Within that residential transition zone, you can define things like civic buildings. So in areas like this where we have churches and schools that might get rebuilt or changed or something might happen, you can define that in a way that there's some consideration of that in the code itself. How could that school or that church better support what's going on in this particular area? So so I guess if you remember nothing else from our conversation tonight, really there are only 4 district types that we're trying to define here. So the first we call town center. So when we talk concentration, we're talking 2 and 3 stories in height, something that's compatible with the neighborhood around it. But as you can see, the form of these buildings, brought up to the street, lots of doors and windows on the ground level, start to define a more pedestrian scale, a more human scale experience in this particular area. The Union Park Center, where you've already got a fair amount of height and density, defining the code in those areas. So when things like a change in use happen in that area, if housing becomes part of what's going on there, those pieces are defined in a way that it's again compatible, but different from what's going on in the rest of the city. So, and here just a few examples. So the third, Fort Union Boulevard. So as a place type, we're talking 2 and 3 stories in height, bringing things up to the street, starting to define that public realm a little bit better. But as you can see, we've got a variety of uses here. So whether it's townhomes or commercial, that use is really secondary to what the form of that development might be. And where we want to concentrate growth, when we're under a lot of growth pressure, concentrating that growth in key nodes is really the key to figuring out, okay, we're growing, but where do we really want that change to happen? And how do we want it to express itself? And then the last, the residential transition zone. This, for the most part, would be residential in use as well, although not necessarily restricted to. The thing that really defines it is, okay, the heights are going to be shorter if it's adjacent to a single family neighborhood. How do we define it? What sort of setbacks do we need? If you've got a townhouse development, that type of development, what that setback is from the property line, that makes a big difference to the people that surround it. Currently, that's a little ambiguous. What we're trying to do is define that in a way that is going to, again, kind of buffer those commercial areas a little bit better than how they're currently.
What is that wood structure on the upper left?
That's a pergola.
Yeah.
Yeah,
in the front of the property?
That's like a back alley, yeah. Don't focus too much on the details of these pictures, but just the, yeah.
General,
That's a back.
That's like an entryway, yeah, that's like a main walkway, it's like an entry structure you walk under.
these are some townhomes. I think they're they're in Murray at 39 South. And so they've got these, when we sort of start talking about alleys and lanes, this is kind of defining, okay, this is a pedestrian only corridor, but you make it possible for all of those townhomes to kind of front onto a through way.
Hey, Mark, so this, we're talking about setbacks. I think that's one of the many problems I have with 23 views is it feels like it's going to fall onto Fort Union.
Okay.
And it just seems like it was stacked too much in there. Obviously stacked is a bad word because stacked parking was allowed there too, that I know that we've taken care of that. But when the other one farther east doesn't bother me as much because it's set back a little bit. Because it just feels like if things are just too forced, it doesn't look comfortable to me.
Yeah, I think the setback types and how that defines the place, that's kind of a key part of this. I'll tell you, most of the battles around form-based code are about setbacks and front doors. That really, when all is said and done, all of this is very doable, but when you have someone like McDonald's or 7-Eleven that has a formula that says, no, this is how we do it. If we're trying to say, it's totally fine, you're welcome in our city, but we need the parking located in the back, or we need the front door on the street. That for large organizations, I would say they have a hard time with that. But setbacks and main entry, that's a real key. But again, if you think about if the front, we're all familiar with Holiday Town Center. They've been very successful at bringing all of the entrances, all of the buildings, even a grocery store right up to the street. It defines a very nice place. You can imagine how different that would be if the front doors of all of those places were facing the parking, which is behind. And so really focusing on the things that are really difficult to change and not worrying so much about if you don't care for the brick or the stone or the paint color that they've selected.
As long as you don't step out your front door, you get your foot run over by the car driving by.
Indeed. And hopefully as Fort Union changes in.
Or you're mobility challenged and you have to drive there and you have to walk all the way around the entire building to get in Dockeria.
Mark, Mark and Mike, this has been really helpful to me. Did you have more?
That's it.
We're about out of time. Okay.
We wanted to give you enough to
I think
process, but
that's
not
really good
not too
information.
much.
Yeah. So thank you. Appreciate you coming.
Yeah, thanks for your time.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. So item 4 is a review of our business meeting agenda.
Do we have one of those?
We have one of those, believe it or
I have my.
That's so funny.
not. So
Just looking.
we we'll have a pledge of allegiance. We have our city council committee reports this evening. And then we'll have a citizen comment period. We have a public hearing scheduled specific to, let me read this for you. So the public hearing to allow public input regarding the sales tax agreement to be entered into by and between the city and the Cottonwood Heights Community Development and Renewal Agency for the repayment of agency sales tax and tax increment revenue bond series 2023, and any potential economic impact of the project described therein to be financed with proceeds of bonds issued under the act may have on the private sector. So, Scott, have you introduced that in the business meeting as well? Is there anything you want to bring back and talk about now specific to that?
Not really that I can think of that's different than anything we've already discussed, so.
Okay, Tim, anything on your end?
Now, so there's no decision after the public hearing. It's holding the public hearing. You adopted the bond parameters resolution and we'll hold the hearing and which is part of the process.
Okay. Perfect. Any questions with that? And then we only have one legislative item tonight, which is consideration of ordinance 394, amending the PDD 2 zoning ordinance, enacted under the ordinance 363A. If you remember our last meeting, we talked about changing. Do you want to? I'll let you.
Yeah, I can get in, I can answer questions, but this is the zone that specifically applies to the development of the northern gravel pit and nothing else. This doesn't modify any other ordinance requirement or process. What this does though is it just clarifies a provision in there that says, hey, if there's any, based on the city's sense of lands requirements and the development codes as they move forward, if any of those studies result in a significant change to what was already approved, it has to go back through that whole public process. This text amendment was a proposal to clarify what significant meant essentially. So what this would do is allow for minor reductions in unit count, building height, densities, things like that, based on those development requirements. So it doesn't allow for a substantial reduction. It doesn't allow for an increase in any intensity without that full public process, but this would allow for minor 10% reductions in those building measurements as a result of ongoing, preparing, engineering and study of the site.
Perfect. So questions, comments, I won't have you repeat that in the business meeting, but questions, comments now, anything?
Well, I think a little bit of flexibility down is, certainly in this case where this one's on faults, if something else changed, they can make a slight adjustment without having to go through the entire process. I think that's fair. We may want to consider as we move forward in future PDD zones
Doing
to
the same
just
thing.
include
Sure.
something similar that
Yeah, I agree.
on parts that we may not be quite as, reduction in unit counts is usually not a problem for most.
Well, this is a reduction too.
Right.
It's not,
Right, I'm not suggesting we go for increases, but
right.
rather than having to do this again and again, maybe that's certainly a look to it to add on to future
Well,
zones.
well, I'm not, if I understand what Councilman Bracken has just said, I don't know if I agree with that, because what I want to see in this rewrite of our SLEDS ordinance is that the first step should be to determine what land is SLEDS compliant. By definition, SLEDS is done to maximize public safety by determining all geohazard conditions and establishing mitigation plans to determine the buildable land for any given PDD. So
Well, my comment didn't have to do with SLED, it had to do what happened is you're going through the process where you're going through that or something else, and you find something that means, like in this case, we have to shave off a section of the building because we found out that all was questions than we thought.
but I think the point,
So the SLED's working, it just means rather than go through and start the entire process from the beginning and go again through for a minor adjustment like this would still be counted as, it wasn't minor, it was a different word, non-substantial. That they could go ahead and without taking a stop and going through a 6-month, 9-month or whatever the process is to continue moving forward on the project. SLED still applies. But I don't think we're not certainly not getting to a point where we're going to rewrite SLEDs to make them again. We discussed about making them know everything up front before they even start. That gets to be unrealistic for development.
I disagree. I think one of our basic principles for the SLEDS rewrite is to have buildable land sites in sensitive lands to be legislatively approved with demonstrative due diligence of the approval and decision-making process in advance of
That's absolutely not a
design.
legislative decision.
Well, that's what the DRC is.
No, they're not a legislative decision maker.
They are within the SLEDS process, I believe.
They're administrative.
Yeah, they're.
The legislative.
We can talk about
decision-making-
SLED when SLED is back. This is just
Yeah,
the.
this is
The legislative body.
Text
Well,
amendment.
I know, but I think
Yeah.
it's because Councilman Bracken said he'd like to see this in future PDD projects, and I don't. I wouldn't.
Sure, and that would come up in those. Those are all site context based, so you'd address that as each one comes forward.
Different animal.
Definitely.
Yeah, we would have the wording or not the wording that would allow that flexibility, and that's based on the individual proposals.
PDDs are legislative. The final approval is a legislative vote on both the development plan and the enabling ordinance. So the council would have a say in what that ordinance says or doesn't say and what it allows.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. And then the consent calendar is the minutes for February 7th that we'll approve tonight too. So Okay, so staff reports, we have 3. I'm not expecting them to take a long amount of time, any of them. So but number 1, or letter A on our staff report is the Little Cottonwood design contract, and we'll have our Community and Economic Development Director Mike Johnson lead us in this as well.
Okay, very quickly. This was discussed in the council retreat, but this is just some context for a future action item that may come in front of the council based on your feedback. This would be just a trailhead design concept for the 26-acre parcel that the city owns near the mouth of Little Cottonwood Canyon. That's highlighted on the screen here. So
The Spain property,
the
right?
Kessler Despain property, Utah Open Lands purchased it through a fundraising process through a substantial city contribution in 2020. And then ownership of it was turned over to the city, so we own it and there's a conservation easement on it now. Even when the property acquisition was going on, this had always been identified as a potential Bonneville Shoreline trailhead access location. So the rationale for why we're bringing this in front of you is we have the budget for it. It's about $3,000 based on the numbers and the proposals we've received to develop a concept site plan. So we can afford that within current budget, and it allows the city to seek future outside funding at a time.
That's the important part to star. Right
Yeah.
here.
Having an adopted plan that's site specific allows us to go chase down
We can then go
funds.
chase dollars.
Right. To construct improvements on the site. Again, the timing of that is up to the council, but having a plan in place will help, and just seems like good time.
Specific to the governor's direction with trail head connectivity, and that's why we need to do this. We need to get something. If we don't have anything in mind, how are we gonna go ask for funding for it?
The site is also in the Bonneville Shoreline Trail Access Plan that was adopted, I think, right before Utah Open Lands purchased the property and listed this site as a secondary access opportunity. So you can see that here, it's number 9 on the screen. North is to the left, south is to the right. I don't know why the picture looks so funny, but number 9 here is that area. So it's identified here as a secondary access location. This is not site specific enough, but secondary access in the plan is basically parking, very minor amenities, and then trail access. So it's not even as substantial as Ferguson Park, where it's a restroom and major parking facilities. It's just a little bit of parking, a few little amenities like some shade pavilion, maybe a bench or 2, and then trail access. So that's how it's identified in the plan. The concept would be developed following what's in that plan.
I would like to say, add into the record that I still believe that one of our greatest challenges going forward in the immediate years and in the decades ahead is going to be traffic. Traffic that is generated by new parking lots. And I would urge our council and our staff to really put into the thought process how we can develop some kind of trolley system, some way of allowing people to get to these trailheads in our foothills, other than building more parking lots. More parking lots, they're expensive. They bring more cars onto our roads. And I think we really have an opportunity to look into the future and think about how we can encourage people to move throughout Cottonwood Heights, whether they live here or not, in a way other than they think of driving their car to the trailheads and such. And so a design that would give some kind of a turnaround for people to be dropped off and really think more aggressively about how we can reduce the traffic. Again, that comes up in our surveys. Our citizens don't want more traffic noise, traffic danger, and more cars on our roads.
Councilman Newell's repeatedly said a number of times that's a cultural change that would need to happen. You've got an idea how to force our entire population to do that, then I guess bring that up. But honestly, there is the way people, we do have to plan for the way people will do things. And honestly, when it comes to the cost between a few parking spots so that I could drive up and walk on a trail, as opposed to a trolley system that very few people would use, I think the costs probably don't compare.
This is a car-centric design, and it has come up. This is not the world according to Ellen. This is what has come up in our Y2A surveys, that residents want transportation alternatives. This is a priority to them. They do not want us to induce more traffic on
We
our
haven't
roads.
asked them. And that would be something I would suggest in our transportation survey, if we can get it done. Are you really gonna give up your cars?
No one's
do this.
asking anyone to give up cars. I wish you would stop stating things that I have never said. I have never said we
So-
are encouraging people to use other forms of transportation.
Let's let Mike continue.
No, so yeah, next step. So again, this is secondary. The primary parking lots, we're not proposing that here, even in the master plan and final design and circulation and turnarounds and things like that. Certainly, we would want to accommodate all modes of transportation. So that would be part of that design process, which, as you see in the current plan, it's just not adequate. This is just a really rough concept. So this isn't good enough and it's not site specific. So that is part of the reason we think this contract's good. Next steps, we would get a contract resolution in front of the council as early as next week at the next meeting, and then we just start project kickoff. That would include check-ins and meetings with the council as well as part of that process.
If I may add something, and it goes along, Mayor, with what you had indicated. There have been times that the state of Utah has asked if we have project-ready projects, and to be ready for that, for funding options, and it was all based on funding potential options. Be ready for that is really key.
We're not ready, we're last.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But okay, we'll bring the contract back and then we'll get into the design.
Okay.
That'll go into the summer.
Awesome. Thank you. So, next item B, 5B is a budget calendar discussion. And so we'll let our Administrative Fiscal Services Director, Scott Jurg, just let us know how we're gonna approach this next budget season.
All right. Let me share my screen here. All right, so this budget calendar was included in your council packet. And in here. So we started January 23rd. We sent out forms to each of the department heads and the city manager to look and see through their budget and submit things that they think that they might need in terms of changes. On January 31st, we had this council retreat. Of course, many people that are in this room were there. This just ended that process that we started with the department directors. Let me do sit down, get it on my way. Then the items through, including today, are just items in this area that I highlighted. Almost keep going too far. Anyhow, all this stuff is stuff that has been going on in the background with department heads and Tim, as we've been going through trying to review different things that are going on to this point in time. Starting on March 14th, which is a Tuesday, we're proposing to have a budget committee meeting and then compensation committee meetings kind of alternating. This one here on compensation committee meeting is being proposed for Thursday, March 16th. Other than that particular day, we're trying to have the meetings be on a Tuesday if possible. But of course, that's up to your schedules as well.
Yeah, and let me just mention, we have flexibility in this.
Okay.
These are tentative dates, so we will be reaching out, obviously, to those on the benefits and compensation, Councilmember Peterson and Councilmember Burrell, and then the budget committee. We want to obviously make it work for your schedules, and so that's what I will be talking with you more
I
about.
appreciate that. I do have something on the 16th, so thank you.
Okay.
I'll figure it out.
You're not available on the 16th.
Yeah.
So we'll come up with something different.
So then, and again, like Tim said, these are suggested dates out into the future. They're not hard dates until we get a little bit closer to the end of the process. And we will do some presentations to the council in this meeting where we will go over various things. But on May 2nd, which is the first meeting in May, we're required on that day to adopt the tentative budget, and that puts the tentative budget out for the public and kind of gives a framework to what we anticipate the budget to be going into our next budget year that starts July 1st of 2023. It doesn't mean that we're holding that, you know, that's exactly what it's gonna be like. It can change and everything beyond that. But that gives a good framework for that. Then we go through a process going through and starting on June 6th, we'll have the public hearing on that budget. And then the final property tax rate and adoption of the budget would happen on June 20th. And that just kind of sets that framework up, but all through May, from basically from May 2nd forward, each of you might get, you know, information from, you know, constituents, residents, whoever that may want to, you know, tell you this, that, and the other, or whatever about the budget. And then you might bring information back to, you know, Tim, whoever it happens to be that you're talking to. And we'll make and adapt to things that's needed through that process until we adopt. Now, this assumes that there will not be a tax increase. We don't anticipate that there's going to be a need to do a tax increase or anything like that this year. Our fund balances are very healthy for this point in time. And then down at the bottom of this, it kind of outlines who's in what group so that everybody can be aware of where they fall in all these different areas. I'm not sure if there's any questions or anything at this point in time.
May I add something? Obviously, our discussion at the retreat in the direction that you gave us, especially when it comes to revenues and other elements, will play into the budget proposal that you'll see. There's some fees that you wanted us to incorporate in there into the revenue portion. So those are things that you'll see. And as we go through the committees and do that work, you'll help shape the aspects of the budget that will be the final one that will be brought to the full council, and then deliberation will occur. But we're taking that feedback from the retreat, and that's helping us build this budget.
This year, you're not gonna have the boxing gloves for the budget committee, though, right?
We might.
I may have had an advantage before, but I definitely.
We didn't last year. So it was cool. It was cool.
May I ask, along the lines of the retreat, were you gonna draft a synopsis of that?
Yes,
we'll get soon?
yes. In fact, I am working on that. I sent my proofs today to Beatrice, and either by the council communications this week or next week, next Friday, I will have those ready. Probably not this Friday, but it'll be the next Friday. So.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks, Scott. We got a fun little few months to do a really important job. So, thank you. Okay, item C is a parade parameters discussion. You might ask yourself, where is that and why is that here? Well, I think this came out of the Arts Council.
Butlerville Days.
Butlerville Days Committee. You know, and I'm happy that they're talking about it, because this is we saw the tragedy that happened last year. We implemented some measures to try to be, you know, make our parade safe. And so, but they've got some ideas, and is it Paula, are you gonna just lead this? Is that right?
Both of us.
Both of you are gonna lead this discussion. So yeah, give us some background. So.
So the Butlerville Days met recently, and they talked about some of the parameters on the parade, and most of the safety guidelines that were there remain the same. But I think the biggest change that we have is to make sure that we're not throwing candy, we're handing out candy. And then the biggest one that we wanted to bring to your attention was that the committee recommended that we allow participation for those that are candidates in Cottonwood Heights, or either seeking a seat or already seated, to participate in the parade. We still are not encouraging public forums. It's a family event, and we want families to have fun together and not be dealing with those kind of things during a fun time that they're bonding. So those are the biggest change that we wanted to bring to
I don't quite follow that last description. What are you trying to reduce in the parade?
Trying to eliminate what happened this past year with the gentleman.
People walking down the sides.
That would, let me stop that. There were two incidences in our last parade where there were basically election oriented activities going on. One was by a candidate for the county, and the other was by a sitting elected representative in the city. We have in the past always tried to avoid electioneering or promotion of that when we've had candidates for sitting council and mayor in the parade. It's been, this is who they are, they wave and things like that. It's not been a, hey, vote for me, that type of a thing. We did run into a problem a few years ago when one of the candidates had a bus and was also sitting, and it was, so this is addressing kind of that issue on whether we allow more campaigning in the parade itself, or
It's not allowing campaigning as much as we want the public to be aware of those that are seated and those that are running for seats with the council. It's nice to put a face to the names. People see them walking, they have their little vote that they shouldn't, but now it's allowed. It will be
the reality is that
Yeah.
that's what that becomes.
Yes.
There would be a vote,
And
there would
so
be some campaign.
I believe the committee saw benefit to that. That said, again, public forums, we're discouraging that. We just want people to
A public,
be informed, but
what's an
I didn't
public
have issue
forum?
with that when I was speaking. I was talking about the gentleman gal that was going up and down and creating some confusion as to.
Right, that was
What was
part of a
happening?
position, because there can't be restrictions on the parade sidelines. That's a public forum.
Exactly.
Okay.
This would give them the opportunity to purchase the,
Fill out an application.
Fill out an
Mhm.
application,
Yeah.
sorry,
Yeah,
to
exactly.
be in the parade,
Oh,
to have their, and to walk with their groups and, you know, yeah, like we said.
So clarification, those that are running for seats that are not elected, they have to pay to.
No, there's no.
Fill out an application.
So
No,
they can't campaign. It's a campaign parade too. it sounds like.
So what this is, to answer your question, what this is proposing. Okay, prior to this proposal tonight, the wording in the parade guidelines does not allow for. The event or the parade is not intended to serve as a political forum or discussing political issues. That's the way it's been for as long as we've been a city. That stays the same. But what changes, if the council is comfortable with this is what the Butlerville Days Committee recommended, is that before you were not allowed to have candidates be an official part of the parade. Now this would allow for that. An official part of the parade.
So it
Candidate,
becomes political then.
Yeah.
So
Again, that's my, because even the way that it has been worded, we've had sitting elected officials who've taken the opportunity to make it a campaigning event or for their entry, which can be uncomfortable to say.
And
No.
I'll tell you, I want to hear from Councilmember Burrell, because I know, but I agree with that. So and you know, our legislature or our senators and representatives, if it's campaign season for them and they get to go and be in our parade, then, you know, it almost becomes, is it unfair to the person that's running against them that's not going to get the same visibility?
Right, that's why we've always tried to keep the number 4. It's not intended to be a political forum, however, part of that gets down to, you know, personal choice. You know, I've always been fine, you know, like the thing on the side of the car, it's kind of what Days of 47 does. This is the governor, he'll wave to you, but there's never campaigning type items there. Despite that being the case, we've had 2 incidences where it has turned that way. Anyway, so if we allow candidates in there, I don't know that we're gonna not have, it will be more of that. Or we'll need to take a harder stance on the campaigning part of any entries in the parade.
Let's hear from Councilmember Burrell.
Well, I from what I can understand about what's just been proposed, it's a contradiction. On the one hand, you're saying we want to keep the parade non-political, yet you're saying that now candidates can, that's as political as you can get, a candidate, you know.
Political issues versus candidates. I think is the
So,
distinction.
well, so I I mean, having been denied entry into the parade myself on behalf of a civic organization called Save Not Pave, which was to save our community from being fractured. It was not political, but it was interpreted by the parade officials and the city electeds as political, when all of us who started it and spent our volunteer time to try to elevate safety on our roadways, safety for our community, and that float was denied entry into the parade because it was considered political. And we've stood firmly that this is a pioneer day. It's to recognize our history of Cottonwood Heights. And now to say, well, we're going to have candidates in the parade, but we're going to continue to prohibit any float that we in any way think is controversial.
Yeah, I think the mayor made a good point. This is about candidates walking the parade. They're not stopping to interact with people. They're walking the parade. So there's no discussion or debate. And then there's public forums where there's discussion or debate where the candidates will stand and present whatever their issues there are and what they're going to do. And so this is what is discouraged. We encourage, I think the committee encouraged candidates to be on the parade at this point because it's walk, get to know who's running, who's already seated, who might be seated and is running, but not have those debates during this family time that we believe Butlerville Days really gets.
So it's basically what it changes is allowing candidates that are running for office in Cottonwood Heights to be an official part of the parade. That's all it's changing with what they're recommending with these parade guidelines. Everything else stays the same.
Well, you know, and I guess that could be fine. I would think that what we may need to do then is be a little more, and I don't know that whatever we write may not have an impact on what actually happens on the day, because what actually happened on the day was not what we were expecting in either case, because people will still choose to do what they do. But if you kept it to, again, I've always liked the way that the days of 47 did it, where it was just identification. This is who it is. If it's, you know, George Clooney or Tabitha, whatever her name is, this candidate for District 3, and simple like that. I certainly have a lot less trouble with it. Because if it becomes just where that campaigning becomes an issue, then this body, us, has an interesting decision every other year. Do we go with the city float and our elected official as representative of the city, or do we forego being in the group and have a campaigning entry immediately following it or something like that? And so, you know, that gets to 2 or 3 of us every other year.
Councilmember Newell and then Peterson.
No, I spoke my piece. I'm good.
The one thing that I've seen and we've seen over the years is sometimes people find a way to get around the rules. And they said, don't do this, but oh yeah, by the way, they just barreled through. And breaking rules, if we have no teeth, they're not rules. So I think we need to look at that too. Because if you say it's not political, but then it is political, then like you say, what are you saying? As far as what I'm saying is if people are going to run for office and they're in the parade, and then the elected officials are also in the parade, I'm not sure. I need to think about that. This is the first time I've heard this proposed, so.
So you can think about it. We can bring this back. We're not in a really tight time frame on this, but it is different than what we've had before. If you were running for office, you were not part of the parade. You could go along the side, and then we had issues, of course, with people. But this would be a change from that, and so we can definitely bring this back if you want to think it through. But and keep in mind, these are guidelines. The teeth issue, we've not had people kicking people off the parade route and that's a whole different.
Ellen was about to throw Dowd out of the wagon, I think. You remember that?
Gonna grab him by the shirt.
So,
No, I didn't like it because it made it look like we were endorsing Gow, because he was right alongside
He was in
of
front of
our
us most of
float.
the time. yeah.
That's the problem I had. If he had been somewhere else, but he's like, hey, they like me. I'm one of them,
I think he stole some of my candy.
You get it for that.
So yeah, let's,
Can I just make a
Yep.
small point? Sorry to interrupt. Just wanted to let you know that Ann Natural spoke with all the residents that sit on the committee and they all recommended these changes. Just so you,
from the Butlerville Days.
Days committee, yes.
Okay.
And I think, Ellen, the difference that you were looking for between a political entity and a candidate is, you can see that division. If it's a political entity or group, aside from an actual candidate for Cottonwood Heights, that would be the division here in my eyes. That you'd have to exclude those groups versus an actual candidate.
Well, where we draw the line on what is a civic group and what is a political group.
Well, some of those bounds cross though.
Exactly.
Because if a certain group has a list of their group and that's used politically, which I know some things were, that becomes a political organization, and it may not have been filed as a PEC or a PAC, but it happened. And so we need to be aware of that. I'm glad you brought that up because it can become a political group, whether by definition, that's
Or by action.
or action. Yeah.
But we can
So
come up and.
We'll
it's
talk
about a couple
more
weeks.
about it, I think, yeah. So
It's,
we've got some
it's not the first time we've had this discussion.
Yeah.
And probably-
First time I have.
You're just the second.
Yeah.
Most you're first.
So item 6 on our calendar is a review of calendars and upcoming events. Just a couple of things real quick. Starting February 15th through the 31st of May, the Cottonwood Heights Children's Choir rehearsals will be held weekly on Wednesdays. Free ongoing registration for school grades 3rd through 6th. For more information, they can go to chcityarts.com or contact NHL. February 23rd at 9 a.m. will be our next legislative work session. That's always a fully remote meeting. So through Zoom, via Zoom. February 24th, the Arts Council presents Sweetheart Paint Night. Starting at 6:30, the cost is $7 and you do have to pre-register.
I think it's sold out.
Is it sold out already? Awesome. That means.
No calendar charge, just $7.
We didn't charge enough, yeah.
Hey, I love that people want to come.
Yeah, that's great.
Awesome.
So some of those activities they've done the children's art at Butlerville Days also are very popular and they sell out.
Yeah, I love it.
But I think it's probably better that there's a controlled number of people for an activity.
You have to
like
do it
that.
with those.
We had to let her know because of the supplies and everything.
Mhm.
So pay attention to this one, public and council, March 2nd is out of our normal calendar for our first March council meeting. That is a Wednesday. Oh, no, March 1st. Oh, that's not on here.
You change that again, Mayor.
So that's not on here, but I'm adding it. So March 1st will be our council meeting instead of March 7th.
And I need to really emphasize, we need that to be on our website, on the homepage.
As of
It needs to be
tomorrow.
blasting.
Yeah.
Well, no, now.
Yeah,
Because people are looking ahead to their calendar. I went on the website the other day and it needs to be really,
Yep.
you
It
know,
will.
pronounced.
I agree totally. So
And the next day,
And maybe, what do you think, Tim, about the idea of some social media about that?
Yep.
Yeah.
We'll do
Great.
it all.
Great.
We'll do it
Great.
all.
We should
starting
have the right
tomorrow.
ways.
Yep,
Yeah.
it'll happen, yep. So, and then the council member Brackens
Set a new precedent.
credit, absolutely. It's maybe the most important thing on our list. March 2nd at 6:30 is the youth city council dinner with the mayor and the council. So that was a super fun event last year, and I know they look forward to it, and so do we, to be with them. So, and then March 17th and 18th is the Cottonwood Heights Arts Council Guys and Dolls musical editions here at City Hall. We don't have on our March meeting, which will be the 21st, will be our second council meeting. Right, 21st, starting up for our work session. April 8th will be the city Easter egg hunt at Butler Park at 10 a.m. That's always super popular. That was really fun last year. And then Butlerville Day is July 27th through the 29th. Volunteer
Easter egg hunt
sponsors
will-
needed.
It will still be a lot of fun. We will have a lot of things out there and did mention that supply chain issues have hit there. We may not have 40,000 trees this year. It
Oh,
may be
really?
a little more limited just because
Easter
it's,
bunnies.
yeah, the Easter bunnies got expensive.
Yeah.
Okay,
Even the plastic things.
so we do not have anything to discuss in a closed meeting.
Probably good because our CDRA is supposed to be at 6.
So at this point, I will entertain a motion to close our business meeting and move into a CRDA meeting beginning at 6 p.m.
We will close, adjourn this meeting and go to our CDRA meeting in 5 minutes.
I second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have a 5-minute